Hello, and welcome to Hoosier History with Vercingetorix. On our last episode, we covered how George Rogers Clark conquered the British forts at Kaskaskia, Cahokia, and Vincennes. In addition to protecting the American settlers, this also gave the American peace negotiators the leverage to demand that the western boundary of the United States be set at the Mississippi River instead of the Appalachian Mountains. How these negotiations went and who made them will be the topics of our episode today. Now, at the point of time of our story, in the late 1700s, Britain was much more powerful than the United States. At this point in time, the USA was just 13 former colonies that had just declared independence. It wouldn't be until the 1890s that the American economy surpassed the economy of the British Empire in size. So today we're telling the story of the men who secured the future of America and of Indiana against the British Empire. We begin in December 1776. At that time, Benjamin Franklin arrived in France to begin negotiating assistance from France to the United States. At this point in time, Franklin was already accomplished in several scientific fields. He discovered several facts about electricity, including that lightning is electricity through his famous kite experiment, designed a new type of odometer to measure the revolutions of a carriage wheel to aid with determining the precise lengths of postal routes, mapped the Gulf Stream, and invented a new type of stove in 1742 called the Franklin stove. Before this, most homes were heated by open fireplaces set in the wall. Franklin's stove had several major innovations, two of which were that it was centered in the middle of the room so that way heat could radiate outward from the stove into the entire space, and with a metal tube leading from the stove to the outside, and that as the smoke went up the tube, the heat from that could be absorbed by the metal and then radiated into the room. This stove could produce more heat with less wood, and many of these stoves heated homes throughout Indiana in its early history. Franklin was not only a scientific genius, but he was also a patriot. When he was a delegate before the Continental Congress, he said, quote, "I am persuaded, gentlemen, that the fortune of war may be adverse for a time, but I am equally persuaded that the God who made and governs the world, and who inspires the hearts of our ancestors with a love of civil and religious liberty, will never suffer that inheritance to be wrested from us by the hands of tyrants. I am confident that the United Colonies will never submit to the domination of Great Britain, and that, if they cannot be reconciled, they will be separated forever. I am satisfied that nothing but the exercise of the most wanton cruelty and unheard of barbarity can reduce them to such a situation, and that, if they are driven to the necessity of it, they will seek an asylum in the woods, and choose rather to be destroyed by wild beasts than submit to a domination which they cannot but look upon as more barbarous and destructive than that of the savages of the wilderness." In France, Franklin was celebrated as a celebrity due to his scientific discoveries. They even made medallions with his face on them. His fame allowed him access to elites and powerful people in government. Franklin's opinion on the French was mixed. In a letter to a friend written on July 17, 1777, he said, quote, "The French are a very amiable people and have many good qualities, but they are too much given to dissimulation and even to deceit, which I think proceeds from the great veneration they have for politeness. They think it would be impolite to disappoint a friend who has been at the pains to make them a visit, by not promising what he desires, but they rely on his politeness in turn to excuse their not performing, so that a promise from a Frenchman is no more than, 'I will do it if it is convenient,' and not like our English promises, which are, 'I will do it certainly.'" Benjamin Franklin's goal here in France was to get government support for the American colonies and the revolution against the British. He was doing this covertly, and the French government was unsure if they really wanted to put major backing behind the American colonies. But after the American victory in Saratoga in 1777, they wholeheartedly decided to support the Americans and along with John Adams, Benjamin Franklin signed the Treaty of Alliance with France in 1778. After their loss at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, the British decided that they wanted to pursue peace. British negotiators initially approached Benjamin Franklin in 1782 with a proposal for a version of home rule for the American colony. This Franklin rejected outright. He insisted that any peace treaty must involve Britain recognizing the independence of the American colonies and must be negotiated with France. When Congress received word of the British peace overtures, they dispatched John Adams and John Jay to assist Franklin in negotiating the peace. John Adams was born and raised in Boston. He was a lawyer and had a reputation for being very fair. He actually represented the British in the lawsuit over the Boston Massacre. He was later elected to be a representative in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, where he joined the Patriot faction. He was selected to be Massachusetts representative in the Continental Congress and was a part of the committee that drafted the Declaration of Independence. John Adams would also have a major influence on the Articles of Confederation for the national government that we will cover in a later episode. Adams was then dispatched to France to aid Benjamin Franklin in negotiating the Treaty of Alliance. Adams disagreed with Franklin on how much a diplomat should socialize and how many parties they should go to. He was a much more of a just show up to the negotiations and negotiate and be about business. Adams said of Franklin, quote, "He is too much of a courtier and too much a man of the world to be a good Republican. He has too much of the Jesuit in his character," unquote. In addition to this, Adams had some family issues that prompted him to return to Massachusetts. Once he was there, he helped draft the Massachusetts state constitution. This passed in 1780 and is the oldest currently in effect state constitution in the United States. He was then sent to the Netherlands to be the American minister to that country. While there, he was able to negotiate their recognition of the United States and of our independence, and was able to secure a loan of 5 million guilders. After this, he was recalled to Paris to aid Franklin and John Jay in the Paris peace talks. Next, we have John Jay, who was also a lawyer, but this time from New York City. He was a member of the First and Second Continental Congresses. Initially, he was a part of the faction that wanted to be reconciled to Britain and wanted to come back under British rule, but later moved over to the Independence faction. In 1777, he helped draft the New York Constitution. He was later elected president of the Continental Congress, and after that was appointed minister to Spain. While he was minister to Spain, he struggled with low resources. On May 23, 1780, he wrote to his wife, quote, "I am here in a disagreeable situation. Congress has made me no remittances. The small credit I had on Dr. Franklin is expended. The idea of being maintained by the court of Spain is humbling, and therefore not the public good." Unquote. Spain at this point in time was suffering from massive inflation due to importing huge amounts of gold and silver from their Latin American colonies. John Jay had a low opinion of Spain. Of Spain, he wrote to Benjamin Franklin saying, quote, "I have been here near 9 months and have not yet obtained an answer to my first letter. The court is very reserved and seems to be in no haste to do anything for us. I have reason to believe that they wish well to our cause, but they are cautious and seem to be more solicitous of avoiding giving offense to England than to promote our interests. They have their own views and will pursue them. I am sorry to say that I have no great opinion of their wisdom or their friendship." Unquote. However, John Jay was still able to negotiate an $170,000 loan from Spain to the United States, which, when adjusted for inflation, comes out to $1.5 million. Soon afterward, Jay moved to Paris to join Adams and Franklin in negotiating peace terms. Long story short, the British negotiators are up against the diplomatic dream team. The talks began on September 27, 1782. The American goals included British recognition of American independence, Britain seceding the entirety of the Northwest Territory to the United States, American fishermen having the right to fish off the coast of Newfoundland, the free navigation of the Mississippi River, protection for American patriots in British-held areas, free trade with Britain, France, and the rest of the world, and a military withdrawal of British forces from American territory. The British, on the other hand, were willing to recognize independence, but also had their own goals. They also wanted free trade with the United States without the administrative and military costs of ruling the area. They wanted protection for loyalists, and they wanted the pre-war debts of the American states to be repaid. Initially, France put forward a proposal to divide America. This would have the United States' western boundary at the Appalachian Mountains, the British would keep control of Canada, the Louisiana Territory would stay under the control of France, while the area including the Northwest Territory and the area south of that, in between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, would become an Amerindian territory loosely ruled by Spain. Now, since this area contains Indiana, that would have had if this proposal had been accepted, that would have had a huge impact on Indiana history, and the area we now know as Indiana would be completely different. But the Americans rejected this proposal because it limited westward expansion. The Americans quickly decided that they would get a better deal if they negotiated with the British one-on-one without the French. They were able to keep this a secret for a while, but eventually the French found out and were hopping mad. However, at this point, Benjamin Franklin's socializing and networking came in clutch, and he was able to use his connections to smooth over this incident. Eventually, Franklin and the French were able to agree that the French and the Americans could negotiate separately with the British as long as they signed their respective peace treaties at the same time. The British initially wanted to have the United States have its same boundaries as it did then, with the western border being the Appalachian Mountain. The American negotiators pushed hard for the entirety of the Northwest Territory and the Mississippi River being the boundary, western boundary of the United States. The British eventually gave in on this point and granted the entirety of the area to the United States. The British, however, fought hard for the Americans to repay the pre-war debts of the states. Adams agreed with the British negotiators and got Franklin and Jay to agree to this as well, in spite of their reservation. There was much back and forth about how loyalists to Britain should be compensated for their seized property. Eventually, it was agreed that the American federal government would request that the states compensate the loyalists. In spite of their differences, the American negotiators presented a united front against the British negotiators. Later on, Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson saying, quote, "Franklin was a great man and a great genius, and his memory will be adored while the world stands. But he was not a saint, and he was not an angel. He had his weaknesses and his foibles, like other men. He had his vanities and his passions, and he was not always proof against them." The Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3rd, 1783. The Americans got most of what they wanted: recognition from Britain of their independence, fishing rights off the coast of Newfoundland, free navigation of the Mississippi River, free trade with Britain and France, and the Northwest Territory was seceded to the United States. Settlers just kept on pouring into the area. But who were these settlers, and how did they live? These questions we will tackle next time. Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions or comments, you can email them to vercingetorix181@gmail.com. I will have that email address in the show notes. Until next time, take care.